1997, the road to Guilford Courthouse would correct that. Now, Mr. Buchanan is here, and he's going to speak tomorrow about Francis Marion. But this is the book in which he uses biographical information on the major characters, background information on sites and incidents. And to give you an example, citations abound. Lumpkin wrote 330 pages to cover the whole Southern campaign, and Buchanan wrote 450 pages that he only got to Guilford Courthouse. And after 2 chapters on these backcountry engagements in his book, and after a very thorough account of Musgrove's Mill, he writes this: Gates may have lost most of his army, but they, the militia, had won the fight, and they were not prepared to surrender the backcountry to the King's Inspector of Militia, Major Patrick Ferguson. Now, the next year, George, South Carolina, Parks and Recreation published this book, and Musgrove's Mill is not mentioned, in spite of the fact that the state of South Carolina had owned the property for 20-some years. Next. 1975, the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism bought the 330 acres of Musgrove Tract. Now, they were bullied into doing it by another eccentric, a politician whose name was Sam Manning, from the Spartan district. He also was instrumental in getting cow pens recognized, and he tried to get people interested in Utah Springs. That didn't work, as you know. But when this property was for sale, he harangued the legislature, and they bought it. But they didn't appropriate any money to improve it. In fact, I don't think they had a foggy notion what it was all about. And so 20 years after, it's not marked. And everybody thought that that 330 acres covered all of the battlefield. The area to the south of the river, where the mill was, and the Musgrove's home was, and the acreage north of the river where the battle had been fought. And it is out in the middle of nowhere, and the locals used it. The Boy Scouts camped there. Phil Adair probably was out there camping with his black powder weapon, and nobody was challenged, so they assumed the state owned it all. But in 1997, George Fields retired. He was very active in the Palmetto Conservation Foundation, and he retired from the presidency of the Spartanburg Methodist College. And he had walked that battlefield many times over the years. And sometime between 1997 and 1998, he hiked again on the north side of the river and found it clear cut. And he knew that surely the state would not clear cut it. And he made inquiries, and he found that it was privately owned, it had been lumbered, it was now being divided into lots for mobile homes. And George's comment was, at the time, was, if you can lose a battlefield between Cross Anchor and the Enoree River, nothing is safe. And in the introduction to the book, he wrote this: I figured if the participants could march over 40 miles behind the British lines to raid a fortified camp, face an enemy twice the size they expected, inflict more casualties on the enemy than in their ranks, and retreated a forced march for 2 days to avoid capture behind the lines, we should, could, and somehow would do the hard task of saving this battlefield. and he approached Ken Riggers, who was at that time the president of the Palmetto Conservation Foundation. The problem was that organization was now involved in acquiring black stocks. So they needed another committee to get money for Musgrove's Mill. And this is the committee, two of them, Ken Riggers and George Fields from the Palmetto Conservation Foundation. The two local politicians, Donnie Wilder and Jim Bryan, and you always need a woman if you want anything done. And we have Henrietta Morgan, South Carolina Society of Daughters of the American Revolution. A committee of 5. George Fields believes that the more people on the committee, the less you get done. And those people energized the backcountry to save that site. They had to buy it. Now, they had a tremendous response from the locals. Now, local businessmen and local businesses who had locals as managers, they would profit nothing because it's too far out for it to be commercially successful. And they didn't support the effort because of any selfish means. The people in the area cherished that site. And public money, private money, organizations stepped up to the plate, and they bought the territory. They bought 30-some acres on the north side of the river. And the politicians had maybe bullied again, PRT, that if the whole battle area was turned over to them, they would establish a site. And they started immediately. Lawrence County built the road. Boy Scouts built a kiosk out on the road. Locals helped build the fencing. And PRT's own crew built the infrastructure, the manager's home, the maintenance buildings, and this is the visitor center. Now, in the foreground is the remains of the Musgrove's Mill house that was burned by vandals in 1960-something. And next, the visitor center is on the top of a hill. It's a beautiful site. And this area down toward the river, the front of, would be where the British encamped. And next, in the early 1900s, the Daughters of the American Revolution marked Mary Musgrove's grave. And of course, the fencing around here, the locals helped with the fencing all throughout the property. Now, behind the visitor center is a rather steep bank down to the edge of the river. Next, George. And there's a trail along the river. You can see there the remains of one of the old bridges. You can also see remains of the mills that were washed out in the flood. Now, in the area across the river, the newly acquired area, they have signage explaining the battle, they have trails, and then they have a picnic site on the riverside, which is very popular for local families because the kids can splash and play, and boaters can put in kayaks and boats. And it's a beautiful site. And Cedar Shoals Creek comes into the Ellery River at that point, and this is a favorite spot, Horseshoe Falls. And the story is that Horseshoe Robinson hid under those falls, and Mary Musgrove brought him food and information from the British who were encamped in her house. Do you believe that?
No.
it doesn't really make any difference. It's a great story.
I'll take that.
These people right here are from Musgrove's Mill. George Fields wrote the following in the introduction to the book. The troubling thought comes in remembering that hundreds of revolutionary war sites are threatened by development and will be lost unless we save them. And many of those sites are here in Clarendon County. And here's your test. Where's the John Candy Plantation, or the home of General Richardson, or the site of Thomas Sumter's home, or the site of the Battle of Chickamauga? And many of the locals know where they are. I think the message I would like to leave with you is that even now, it can be done. They can be saved. So go out and do it. Thank you.